Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here. Thank you for joining me here on the traditional territory of Treaty 6 on this first day of the spring legislative session, and of course on International Women's Day. All Albertans can be proud of the extraordinary accomplishments of Alberta women, from establishing women as legal persons to their past and present leadership in business, law, sciences, our communities, and government. The perseverance of Alberta women and men has brought Alberta through hard times before. As the speech from the throne outlines, we can and will do so again by having the courage to make difficult choices, by supporting each other instead of making a bad situation worse, by pulling together as we have always done, and by exercising good common sense. And it makes sense that we continue to meet Albertans' needs for key services like healthcare and education, while taking action to create jobs and to grow and diversify our economy. And that's what today's throne speech is all about. For example, you will hear about our implementation this summer of the new Alberta Child Benefit Plan, which will make a $340 million investment into 380,000 children in the most economically vulnerable families. And we will take action to end exploitive interest rates charged to Albertans who are least able to afford them by predatory lenders. And we will continue with our plan to invest $34 billion in necessary roads, schools, transit, and other public infrastructure. This investment will provide communities with the facilities they need while helping to keep thousands of Albertans working and supporting their families, and retaining the tradespeople, equipment operators, engineers, and other professionals we need as our economy returns to growth. So we will continue to build and diversify our economy by supporting loans and investments to grow small and medium-sized Alberta businesses, by creating more higher value products through our petrochemical diversification program, and by expanding markets for our economic strengths, including the agriculture and forestry sectors. You will hear about how the Climate Leadership Plan is supporting the energy industry's access to new markets by erasing any doubts about the strength of our environmental reputation. That plan is helping our ongoing efforts to get a pipeline built to diversify our energy markets, including markets in Canada, and to reduce both Canada's dependency on foreign oil imports and the flow of Canadian capital to other countries. Today's speech from the throne outlines an ambitious agenda of support for families, our economy, and our energy and our environmental future. I ask Albertans to consider this agenda, to see that it makes sense in these times and for our future, and to watch our progress closely. I'm happy to take your questions.
Premier, are you taking a shot at the federal government and the country as a whole with those comments about opening up the eastern markets to Alberta oil and bitumen?
I don't really perceive it as a shot. I perceive it as making our case. And I think I'm making our case in a way that I have done in many respects already. And I've said before that I'm going to take every opportunity to make our case to every audience. And I believe our case is a strong one. And so, throne speeches sometimes serve as a platform for that. But I don't see it as a shot. It's a conversation I've had in a very collaborative way with leaders from across the country already.
Premier, when I read this throne speech, I don't think Albertans are going to go, oh my goodness, they're doing something. Is this more a stay the course throne speech for your government to keep implementing what you said you were going to do from the fall budget?
Well, it is in some respects a continuation of what we talked about and the chart we laid out, the path we laid out in the fall, but it also gives more detail. And I wouldn't suggest that it's really stay the course compared to how things have been in the past. I mean, we are very committed, first of all, to diversification efforts in the economy. We have to move on that. And so we have a number of strategies that we'll be rolling out with respect to diversification, an enhancement of what we've already announced, and then as well the additional effort that will be dedicated towards that task through the work of the Climate Change Leadership Plan, as well as the incentives to increasing productivity and ultimately diversification, or at least technological innovation within the energy sector as it currently exists through our royalty program. So there are actually a number of layers in here that are very much focused on economic diversification. So I would suggest that that's not really stay the course. I would also say that when you think about stay the course, one of the things you have to do, and this is something I remind myself of often, is that we're in a price shock. We're in an economic difficulties that are quite unprecedented for the last many decades, quite frankly. And as much as I would like to be charting forth on a whole bunch of new things, it's also important to look at how our government is responding to this situation and comparing it to what might have happened in a stay the course scenario under a different government. What we are doing is we are saying very clearly that we are investing in Alberta, we are investing in Albertans, we are focused on supporting Albertans, and we're focused on maintaining stability. And I would suggest that in these current circumstances, that does not actually represent what would have been a stay the course scenario under different leadership.
I meant under your leadership, from what you proposed in the fall, this is more implementing what you have promised then.
This is implementing a great deal of what we promised then with more detail, with some additional work around supporting families and putting more detail around that.
Your Premier, with regard to the ABCs, Premier,
Yep.
the speech references compensation practices between the public service and the ABCs have diverged, in some cases significantly so. Can you expand on that? What do you see on those?
Well, as you know, in accordance with the commitment I made in the election, we last fall introduced sunshine legislation. And so in June, the salaries of key executives and CEOs in ABCs will be disclosed. Now, we can't start disclosing them now because there's a process that we have to follow through before they can be disclosed. But when they are, you will determine that in some cases, over the last 40 years, there has been some practices that have resulted in some pretty significant divergences. And so what we are doing as part of our ABC review is putting in place a mechanism for there to be more oversight and control by the government of Alberta that establishes a rational linkage between the pay schemes that exist in the direct public service and those which exist in agencies, boards, and commissions, because I would suggest that that doesn't exist in all cases now.
One of the bills here is the Promoting Job Creation and Diversification Act. That's Bill 1, I believe. We'll see more of it today. Can you tell us a bit more about what the plan is there as well?
Well, what that bill does is it essentially enables the minister to engage in a number of different strategies through enhancing access to capital in a number of different programs by engaging in certain tax relief for tax incentive measures that will be laid out in more detail in the budget, as well as engaging in more arrangements between employers and the post-secondary system to facilitate training and on-the-job training. So those are some of the examples. I can't get into tremendous detail because many of them are linked to the budget, but it's an enabling piece that identifies that. Also, we'll be looking at the issue of enhancing regional development plans, regional economic development plans, and enhancing the resources available for regional economic development groups across the province to engage in a more vigorous economic development planning process.
And that's
We'll
our
take this
general-
question and then we're going to go to McDougall.
We're all looking at diversifying the economy. How much can you really do without the price recovering, the price of oil recovering? Like, it seems like, you're kind of waiting for that to happen.
Yeah.
You can sort of tinker here and there.
Well, I mean, there's different arguments out there. I mean, people have often made the argument that when the price of oil was as high as it was, capital flowed there because that was the easiest way to make money. And while that was great for prosperity and people did make money, it meant that all of the excess capital that otherwise would be flowing to diversification and innovation and trying new ideas was taken was monopolized to some extent by one industry. And so, I mean, I'm not suggesting that this is a good thing, because it's not a good thing. We all know that this price shock is going to hurts Albertans now, is hurting them every day, and it's not going to stop in the short term. But What we can do now is say to these businesses that are struggling and say to venture capitalists and say to small business owners, listen, we're going to try and give you some support to start looking at developing your capacity to grow your business in other sectors now, and to make more of that available. Also, even within the energy industry, though, there is the ability for energy to become more efficient and more innovative in how they do their work, both in terms of how it relates to the amount of carbon in every barrel, but also in relation to just the general efficiency and level of technology that's engaged in the extraction process, so that that itself becomes something that's exported. We're a unique energy producing jurisdiction in many respects, in that we have an overlap between a highly developed post-secondary, a highly educated population, a strong public sector, and of course a very engaged energy industry. So we have that overlapping in a way that allows us to work with some of those sectors to try and give them a bit of a step ahead in the absence of, or in advance of, the price recovery.
We're going to go to McDougall Centre now, and then we'll come back to the floor for outstanding questions. Marcella, go ahead with questions from Calgary.
Hi, it's Jeff Morgan with the Financial Post. Thanks for taking my question. My understanding is that the Energy Diversification Advisory Committee will be seeking advice on how to use the bitumen royalty in kind program for value-added projects. Now, does that include perhaps further support for projects like the Redwater refinery?
I think that that's perhaps a slightly narrower understanding of what that group will do. I think they're going to look at a wide range of initiatives that could enhance value-added efforts in Alberta. One example, for instance, was the petrochemical diversification program that we announced 3 weeks ago. So there's no question that it will, in part, analyze the effectiveness and the value for dollar that Albertans received for the Redwater project, and they may look at tweaking it to come up with better or perhaps the same. But I think it's not just about Redwater. I think we're going to be looking at a number of different ways in which we can add value to our product, as well as adding value to different non-renewable products.
Thank you.
Hi, Premier. It's Chris Fark with the Calgary Herald. Just to follow up on what Jeff was saying, and I've got two questions here. Is what specifically do you want this Economic Diversification Committee to consider? I guess, what answers are you looking for? That's my first question.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, the bottom line is, we have a massive and as yet untapped natural gas resource here in Alberta, and attention has moved away from that somewhat. But when you look at the potential of sort of new discoveries and enhanced access to that, the question is, as that market develops, and as the what can we do at this point to ensure that we get greater value added activity happening here in Alberta with respect to that resource. When you look at the issue of bitumen, the question becomes as well, what are the economics of upgrading, and what can we do to enhance or support the economics of upgrading so that there is a business case for it here in Alberta? What are the implications of the different market access strategies? Which is the best market access strategy for us in terms of enhancing that upgrading? So there's a broad range of questions that need to be deliberated on and considered. And what is the effect of the price of oil, as well as the effect of the price differential on the economics of that upgrading? And I think we're in the range of I don't know what the exact economic term is, but we're close to it being economic, but sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. So what can we do to push it over the economic line so that we do have the opportunity to do more value added here in Alberta?
Just to follow up on that, can you tell me how far will your government go? Will your government and this panel consider direct investment, whether it's through structures like loan guarantees or capital into businesses, for indirect incentives to diversify this economy?
Well, I think I'm going to start by establishing this committee and getting them to give me some advice before I start engaging in hypothetical strategies.
Premier, it's Tom Brady from the Herald Herald. Could you tell us whether we're going to get the climate change implementation bill before or after the budget? And when are we going to start seeing details in the budget, or perhaps afterwards, or in the bill, as to how much people are gonna be paying at pumps and specific details of the tax. So in brief, are we gonna see that bill before or after the budget, and when do we start seeing solid details of what it involves for people?
Absolutely. You will see the product of the bill, or the partial product of the bill in the budget itself, which is why you will see the bill being introduced in and around the time that the budget is introduced, because there are clear budgetary implications, and so the bill will follow on the heels of that as it relates to other pieces, because there's multiple pieces, some of which are reflected in the budget, some of which are not. So you will see the questions that you're particularly asking, the amount of the levy, where it's applied, what the rebates look like, who they're given to, what we're estimating they will cost, what the amount of the investment will be, what the amount of the adjustment programs will be. That will all be clear in the budget, and it will be circumscribed, and the limits around that, and the objectives that we're seeking to reach, and the purpose behind it and the process will be enumerated through the bill.
Premier, this is James Wood from the Calgary Herald. I just wanted to ask you, kind of anticipating some of the criticism likely that's going to be aimed at this throne speech, how would you respond to, I guess, criticisms that this is a government interference in the economy, picking winners and losers, not letting the private sector sort of do what it should be doing, and instead relying on the government?
Well, we are in a very, very difficult economic situation here in Alberta as a result of what I would suggest is a bit of a do-nothing approach in the past, and quite frankly, most of what I've been seeing in terms of alternative approaches have also been do-nothing approaches. And in the meantime, we have people losing their jobs each and every day. We have families that are struggling, and we have important services that we in the government need to continue to deliver. So I think that when you are going through an economic downturn like we are going through here, I would say that the exact opposite is true, that you need a government that is going to, first of all, engage with Albertans to provide them and their families with the support that they need to the extent that we can do that. That is the role of government, that we are here to act as a shock absorber. For instance, the way even today the Conference Board of Canada noted that our infrastructure investment is actually softening the rate of growth slowing this year. These are roles that governments have historically played, that economists agree they should play. And so I would reject the notion that we simply cover our ears, cover our eyes, cross our fingers, and sit in a corner hoping that the economy recovers. I think Albertans elected a government that would reach out to them and do whatever they could and make whatever effort they could to work with them to get us all through this downturn.
And Premier, on that note, why is the government choosing to further regulate the payday loan industry? What's the thinking behind what you're doing there?
Well, as you know, it's been a long-standing issue for our party and anti-poverty advocates in general, that there have been incredibly exploitive lending practices in Alberta. But there's no question that there are more people who are vulnerable to them now with the slowdown in the economy that we're experiencing. So we believe it's really important to step in as quickly as we can to try and limit the damage that can occur in those situations, and to work with other providers to find better products that are able to provide a more financially responsible service to low-income families and families that are struggling with financial difficulties in a sort of on a periodic basis.
Rick Bell, Calgary Sun. You talk about the budget and you talk about carefully.
Uh-oh. We lose them?
In the meantime,
All
Oh, sorry, start again, Rick. Your line cut out.
Okay, I'll try again.
Yeah, I talk about the budget, and that's where it stopped.
Oh, okay, so
Okay.
I was saying in the throne speech, it mentions that you're trying to find all possible economies in the budget.
So I was wondering, what is your definition of all possible economies in the budget? And how do you answer critics who would think that your definition of all possible economies in the budget is not perhaps as strict a definition as their definition of all possible economies in the budget?
Well, I would say, first of all, that what you need to do is take a targeted and thoughtful approach that evaluates each program in terms of what it contributes both to economic development as well as community and family support. For instance, the notion that you could do an across-the-board freeze of the budget when we currently have a health budget, which is increasing as a result of locked-in costs at the rate of 6% a year, is to suggest that you would have to make massive cuts in healthcare in order to bring about that freeze. So what you need to do is dig in, roll up your sleeves, and figure out what you can do in a cautious, prudent manner. Sometimes you have to take decisions now that will result in savings a year or 2 years from now. You can't do it overnight unless part of your recipe is to create chaos. And that's not our recipe. Our recipe starts with stability. It moves from there to the issue of what supports economic development and what supports Alberta families and what supports Alberta communities. So each program is reviewed for whether it's still necessary, whether it makes sense in light of the place that Albertans are at now and what their priorities are. But to do an across-the-board measure and to suggest that it's as simple as freezing the budget when we've, got contracts with a variety of folks that we're legally obliged to meet that simply don't reflect that 0% growth is it's just not well informed. And so I would suggest that our approach is one that is governed by information and study and rigorous review, which is geared towards an understanding that Albertans do expect their government to act prudently. And that's why, for instance, we're moving forward on the ABC thing. That's why you'll see us moving forward with the salary structures with respect to executive compensation. And that's why you'll see us moving forward with other decisions to put off spending in certain areas.
And just one supplemental, you talk about job creation in this throne speech. What do you say to those people who say that the environment here is not favorable to job creation, independent of all these programs?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that
Carbon tax, et cetera.
Right. I would say, first of all, I made the argument in Vancouver, and it was interesting. I received quite a round of applause from energy industry folks when I spoke at the Globe Energy Conference in Vancouver, and I've heard this from folks in the energy industry from here, Alberta, that in fact our climate leadership plan actually provides a number of different platforms of opportunity for innovation and business growth and diversification. That's what it's geared to do. Every dollar that comes out from the carbon levy will go back in. And what it will do is it will support the very diversification and innovation that we're talking about needing. Moreover, the other thing to remember is after all is said and done, with everything that we're putting in place, Alberta continues to be the lowest tax jurisdiction in the country. So we continue to be the best place for people to invest. And I am very confident that combined the fact with the optimism and the work ethic and the education levels and the engagement of Albertans will continue to ensure that we are a good place to invest.
We're going to take two more from the phone, guys, and then we'll come back to the room. I know lots of you have questions, but just bear with me while we wrap up from Calgary, okay? Go ahead, Calgary.
Hi, Premier Notley. It's Carrie Tate from the Globe and Mail. I have a question on the market access to Eastern Canada, and you talked about getting Canada off foreign oil. What are you asking the feds exactly to do?
Well, the federal government, of course, has committed to an amended NEB process that is designed to ensure public trust, while I believe still ensuring that it gets to a timely end. One of the things I was very pleased about in Vancouver last week was that I was able to convince all of my colleagues to sign on to a section in our communique where they agreed that the issue of getting resources to market was an urgent issue that required a timely and predictable process. And not only did I sign on to that, and you know, other energy producing provinces signed on to that, but so too did the Premier of Quebec, the Premier of BC, and the Prime Minister of our country. So that is the message that I'm delivering repeatedly to some of those key players. And so what we certainly don't want a process that will just create more delay because people don't trust it, and then suddenly, you know, we've got a process that's finished, but we've still got 17 blockades between us and construction. We want a process that's real, that respects people's concerns, that gives people an opportunity to participate, but we also want a process that is predictable, that industry can count on, that if they do their work, and if we in Alberta do our work, that we can then get a reasonable outcome that allows us to develop the nation's economy, because this is an issue around our national economy. It is not just Alberta.
And then when you talk about getting sort of Eastern Canada off foreign oil, are you still interested in supporting getting oil to foreign economies, something like Pipeline West, where you were somewhat supportive of Kinder Morgan, and then you were disappointed with the U.S.'s decision on Keystone? Are those two still something that you support?
Well, our issue is that we need to get our product to markets other than the U.S. Right now, the U.S. is actually our biggest competitor, and that may change in years to come, but right now they are, and it is from them that we are getting a discounted price. So we need to be able to diversify the foreign markets into which we can sell our products. So that's one thing. But in the meantime and on the way, we actually have domestic markets that we could be more successfully selling into, and that too is just it's more in almost a narrative or an example or a picture of how we have failed to develop our infrastructure in this country in a way that benefits the economics of all on behalf of all Canadians. We just need to get it together on this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Premier. It's Jeremy Van Loon from Bloomberg. Just a very quick question on the Oil Sands Advisory Group. I'm wondering to what extent you're looking to them to actually come up with the details on implementing the climate plan and how it affects the oil sands industry, or whether or not it's more of a group to bounce ideas that are already there, and to kind of get a sense from them how that's going to work.
Well, there's a number of different issues that still need more detail in them with respect to the Climate Leadership Plan. And in fact, the plan itself contemplated and recommended the establishment of the kind of group that we talk about in the throne speech, the Oil Sands Advisory Group. And so, for instance, one of the key things that we've heard, and we knew right at the outset that people were going to want to have, they're not going to make recommendations, they're not going to go off and write the policy for us and bring it back, but they will be fully consulted, for instance, on how we get to the cap, the oil sands emissions cap. Because if we don't come up with a reasonable process, we're going to end up with a land rush on trying to get to and earn access to that cap. So, or earn space between where we are and the cap. And so that is something that we have to work on with all the players in the industry. So that's one key thing that will probably be the first thing that they turn their attention to. And we'll be looking to hear what they are able to advise us and whether they're able to come to a consensus amongst themselves, because obviously that's, I mean, it's all about their competition with one another in many respects. So they're the folks that we need to hear from. But there's other issues too. The land use, for instance, just in and around the oil sands. We've had a number of processes in play around the land use there, some of which are starting to peter out in various and different iterations. And so our hope is to also be able to ask this group to include, of course, community members, Indigenous members, and to ask this group to do work around next, emerging questions on land use. So it will have a fairly broad mandate, but it is, if you read our climate leadership report, you'll see pretty clearly, I think, some of the key things that we see them giving us advice on.
Okay, thanks for your patience. We can come back to the floor now for questions.
Why isn't there any reference in the throne speech to an energy efficiency rebate program? He's long talked about the fact that Alberta doesn't have one. Will we see one by the end of session?
Yes, there will be a fairly major plan with respect to energy efficiency coming forward absolutely within this session.
And that would be like a rebate program that homeowners or individuals could access, for example?
Yes, I mean, likely what we're going to see would be a mechanism through which not only individual homeowners but larger groups, because what we found looking at best practices with other energy efficiency programs is that the best bang for your buck, as they say, is with sort of larger municipal developments, low-cost housing, things, that kind of thing, where you get everybody together. But there will definitely be the opportunity for individuals to apply for support to make energy efficiency changes in their, most likely in their residential and commercial settings.
Premier, there's nothing in the throne speech about minimum wage, which you emphasized quite strenuously previously. Are you considering not raising it as scheduled because of the economic situation?
Well, as I said, when we first introduced when we introduced the change to the minimum wage last summer, what we said was that we would evaluate it as we went along to look at the pace. And so are we still moving forward with that goal in mind? Yes. Is the pace at which we get there amenable to change or review depending on economic circumstances and the types of review and advice we get from the department? Absolutely. So it's still a key piece of our platform. It's a key piece. I think at the end of the day, as I've said before, when we talk about economic development, if we're creating jobs that pay at half the poverty wage, that is not really an excellent economic development strategy. That's not going to help grow the economy. People have to have an income that supports them and allows them to support their families and to, in fact, themselves reinvest in the economy. And so we perceive that as a fundamental economic truth. But at the same time, we need to evaluate what the implications were from our changes that we made in last year. And that's a reasonable thing to do, is to look at the advice that we receive.
But, sorry, Premier, but on that, I mean, you can't wait and wait if the situation's not good and then go boom from, it's like 1080 to, what is it now, yeah, 1080, I think, or
That's 11.
$11 to $15 in like one fell swoop.
Well, as I say, those are one of the things that we have to think about as we go through the deliberative process. But as I say, we didn't say it'll be this much this year, this much next year, this much. We reserved to ourselves the ability to evaluate both the consequences of the first change and also the state of affairs at the time. And so that's what we'll do.
And sorry, Bill 22, why repeal that, and what are the next steps?
So Bill 22, as you will recall, was a consultation act, and when it came forward, there was some irony in it that it was failed to be the product of consultation, and certainly in our conversations with First Nations leaders since that time, there's been a great deal of consensus that they're not happy with it. So we committed in the election, frankly, to repeal it, and so we are going to move forward with that. In the meantime, a lot of discussions and conversations and consultations are underway to figure out how to best move forward to come to a conclusion about what's the best way to replace it and what we can afford to replace it with. And so that's underway right now, but in the meantime, I mean, it's never been proclaimed because, of course, it was not something that First Nations were satisfied with. So we're going to move forward with repealing it, and then our Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Mr. Fian, will enhance and accelerate the work around consultation on it.
You've mentioned the budget a fair amount. Is there a date yet?
I don't believe I have absolutely gotten the final date, but I believe the finance minister suggested that you not take the first 2 weeks of April off. So I will confirm that he's correct on that.
So we won't see a budget until April. We won't let it pass until sometime in May in terms of keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
You gonna go through interim supply again?
Absolutely, interim and supplementary supply, and I would suggest that since I've been elected, it is definitely the minority of cases. I think I can recall 1, maybe 2 years where the budget was actually passed before April 1st. So I believe that supplementary and interim supply is just pretty much par for the course in the Alberta legislature, or has been since I've been
Take
elected.
this last question, then we're gonna wrap up.
In terms of the carbon tax, obviously there's been some criticism of the timing given the economic slump, including Kevin O'Leary recently in an open letter. I know you're a favorite person, saying, maybe delayed that until oil prices recover slightly. Are you still looking at a January 1st, 2017 date, or is there any room to move on that?
Absolutely looking at a January 1st, 2017 date, no question.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.